Good evening, honorable judges and the members of opposing team. Now, first off, going into this debate of the topic that the rich are more responsible for change than the poor, and of course our team are the affirmative teams. Now, first let's jump right into the definitions for the word responsible. Responsible in this case means being the primary cause of something and so able to be blamed and credited for it. Let's take a look at our world, shall we? In our world right now, the poor are completely powerless. They don't have any money and simply does not have any ways or have very less ways to harm the environment. Rich people, however, have a lot of money, as you probably already know. That results in which them buying more and more unnecessary things like cars or using the AC too much because simply they don't have a problem with spending those monies. They are rich. Let's get on to some of my main points to prove our side further. Firstly, money itself is already extremely bad for the environment. Coins are incredibly damaging to the planet. According to the American Council of Science and Health, mining and transporting coins has led to emission of over 48,000 tons of carbon dioxide. For reference, the UK produces over 900,000 tons of coins every year. That is a lot of tons of carbon dioxide, and we cannot afford letting our planet die every day because of that. As you already know, the rich has more money, as I already said. A lot more, actually. If this already does not prove the fact that the rich are the primary cause of climate change, then let's move on to my next idea. The rich are also more likely to buy expensive and harmful things to the environment, like fancy cars, in which they would definitely harm the environment much more than the poor. Poor people, however, does not or has a lot less money and wouldn't be able to buy all of these things at all. So why blame them for climate change when they have no power over it? And when the rich are blatantly using their money and powers for things that cause climate change, as I have already told you. As my last conclusion, let's take a look at a real-life example. A really general example, really. Countries, governments. Rich countries, including the United States, Canada, Japan, and much of Western Europe, account for just 12% of the global population today, but are responsible for 50% of all the parent warming greenhouse gases released from fossil fuels and industry over the past 170 years. Over my speech today, I believe that I have showed you how much the rich are getting away with spending all the money on unnecessary things that harms the environment a lot, and how the poor are sometimes accused for it, even though they did absolutely nothing and have the power to do nothing about it. That is the end of my speech. I rest my case. Thank you for listening.
Good morning, George and members of the opposing team. My name is Daniel. I'm student at John Lake College. I'm joined here by Mandy and Molly. We are going to be arguing that the poor are in fact more responsible for climate change. Now, we would like to point out that rich and poor are highly relative, and we are focusing on the incredibly rich as compared to like the working class people. So I would like to look and draw your attention to the scale of the problem at like how public planes are so much more numerous than private planes. So by looking at the numbers, we find that public planes used by those who are relatively poor compared to, as I mentioned before, the incredibly rich. Global aviation, looking at public planes, will generate an estimated 43 metric gigatons of carbon dioxide through 2050, which is almost 5% of global emissions allowable to keep temperatures below 1.5 degrees Celsius increase. Furthermore, there is the fact that there are over 100,000 commercial flights every day. In 2018, there was almost 4.5 billion flights throughout the year. This averages at somewhere between 100,000 and 125,000 flights per day, which means that the working middle class are keeping these incredibly polluting companies in business simply due to the sheer number of flights and the sheer quantity of carbon dioxide emissions as a result of this. There's also the aspect of transport on the roads. A petrol car in the UK produces the equivalent of 180 grams of CO2 for every kilometre. Whilst this might not seem like much on its own, when you look at the scale of it, as there are approximately 32.7 million passenger cars in the UK, this adds up incredibly quickly. As these are mostly owned by the average person, we can trace this aspect of climate change back to, as I explained before, those who are relatively poor. In 2019, transport accounted for approximately 27% of UK emissions, and about 91% of this was transport vehicles, which emitted about 111 metric tons of CO2 equivalent. Because of all of this, as I explained before, we can't just turn to the rich as the reason. We have to look at every aspect and acknowledge that rich and poor are relative terms, and looking at just the sheer amount of wealth owned by the rich compared to everyone else, the poor are obviously contributing more simply by sheer numbers. I rest my case.
Good afternoon, Mr. and Madam Chair, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Tae-Hang, the second speaker of the affirmative team. So now I'm going to further improve the points. It is that the rich are more responsible for climate change than the poor. First, I'm going to deliver some rebuttals. The first idea of the first speaker from the opposing team is public planes create a lot more emissions than private planes. However, public plane, when you go on a public plane, there are about 100 or more than people flying in that. However, a private one only takes 1 or 2. So if there are like that 100 number of people driving 100 flights of private plane, it is much more emissions gas than the public one. So now I'm going to deliver some of my points. The first point is that most wealthy people cause climate change more than the poor. The statistics are startling. The world's wealthiest are 10% were responsible for around half of global emissions in 2015. According to a research in 2020, wealthy countries have historically contributed the most greenhouse gas to the atmosphere. The rich have caused climate change only for building their own house takes more than 50% of all the planet-warming greenhouse gas released from fossil fuels and industry over the past 117 years. The second point is that poorer people don't use too much fuel. The amount they use cannot lead to climate change. Over that time, the Earth has heated up by roughly 1.1 degrees Celsius for the rich only, fueling stronger and deadlier heat waves, floods, droughts, and wildfires. The poorer countries have asked richer nations to provide more money to help adapt to these hazards. As rich people have a greater carbon footprint than the poor, they should be more responsible to compensate. The third point is that wealthy people are absolutely richer than the other. And that is, of course, in this case, developed countries have time and money to work and be responsible to the climate change. They can do everything. They can plant more trees. They can make a festival. They can make a meeting. They can launch to everybody because they are rich. They have money. They can do whatever they want. And one of the biggest outstanding issues is that how much wealthy countries should pay to have poorer ones work towards building lower carbon economies and adapt to some of the damage that they have already suffered from climate change. As I said, the rich are more responsible for the climate change than the poor. It's just more responsible. It's not all of the they don't need to be all responsible. So even then, the poor still have a little bit of the responsibility for the climate change, so that the world can be changing and it can improve more than before. So for all of the reasons above, I'm real proud to propose.
Hi, I'm Molly, and I'm going to be talking about how you've mentioned that private jets are more than commercial jets because more poor people use public planes, but there's more public planes than private planes. There's 22,000 private jets in operation, whereas there are 150,000 Boeing planes, which is a huge difference. Yes, more people use the Boeing planes and less people use the private jets, but that doesn't really matter because there's still going to be more fuel being emitted by the sheer numbers that are going on these planes. And it also says that 39,620 new planes are going to be needed over the next 20 years. That's more planes than private jets exist. So now I'm going to be talking about how much fuel typical passenger vehicles emits. 4.6 metric tons, which is 4 metric tons is equal to 1,000 kilograms, meaning 4,600 kilograms of carbon dioxide are being emitted per car per year, which is excessive. Now, also, fast fashion. Rich people do not buy fast fashion. Shein is an example of this. Fast fashion accounts for 20% of worldwide waste and 10% of all carbon emissions, which is just ludicrous. Shein clothes are all individually wrapped in plastic as well. This means that the plastic is going to be polluting the ocean. And when it's polluting the ocean, more animals are dying. We've already got a wildlife crisis. When rich people buy clothes, they buy from high-end stores that are not fast fashion. They are sustainable in comparison to Shein. This isn't right. So this shows that poor people are actually more responsible because they're actively consuming things that are creating more emissions, more hazardous waste. And also, I'm going to mention what was mentioned in the first thing. You mentioned how coins are causing a lot of pollution as well. Rich people don't really use cash in hand. They have things like the black Amex card, which is like £5,000. So they aren't going to really be using cash. It's the poor people that are using cash. Cash in hand jobs, you get change from like shops and stuff. So it isn't fair to say that the rich people are doing it as much as us. We are all responsible for it. It's obvious that poorer people are contributing more than the rich. And that's the end of my argument.
So, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Thục Anh and I'm from the Awesome Titans. Now we are standing here to support the motion that the rich are more responsible for climate change than the poor. First, I would like to deliver some rebuttal. The second speaker from the opposing team has tried to tell us that fast fashion takes up to 20% of climate change. Well, rich people also buy more cars in which they take up 20 9% of climate change. So now let's go straight to our point. Our first speaker has shown you three main points. First, money itself is already extremely bad for the environment, and cons are incredibly damaging to the planet. Second, the rich are more likely to buy expensive and harmful things to the environment like cars. Some rich countries like US, Canada, and Japan are responsible for 50% of all the planet-warming greenhouse gases released from fossil fuels and industry all over the past 170 years. Our second speaker has shown you three main points too. First, most wealthy people cause climate change more than the poor. Second, poorer people don't use too much food. The amount they use cannot lead to climate change. And finally, wealthy people are absolutely richer than the other. In this case, developed countries have time and money to work and be responsible to climate change. So, for all the reasons above, I would like to once again believe that the rich are more responsible for climate change than the poor. So, that is the end of my speech. Thank you for listening.
Good morning. I am the third speaker of the negative team. I am Mandy. To respond in the third speaker of the affirmative team, you were mentioning about cars the rich people would buy, but rich people these days buy electric cars, which are irrelevantly and obviously that are more better and more good for the environment rather than cars that poor people buy. And we've mentioned on the second speaker of our team that fast fashion is an example where Shein uses plastic in doing the wrapping job, where rich people buy high-end fashion which use paper wrapping, which is a lot more easier to recycle, which also obviously shows that it is more environmentally friendly rather than what poor people uses. And also because we've mentioned about how public planes are more commonly used than private jets, and it is statistically recorded that poor people are relevantly more than rich people, which already makes it a stronger statement that poor people are more responsible than climate changes. And we've also mentioned that it should be seen as all people are responsible because we are equally in this world, which means that that poor people are also should be seen as people who are responsible in climate change. And also that most people are consuming in ways that are accelerating climate catastrophe. When you take into account of emissions from imported goods, the average person in the UK emits 8.5 tons of carbon a year, according to the Hot or Cold Institute, a figure that rises to 14.2 tons in Canada, the country with highest emissions among those the institutions surveyed, in order to stay within 1.5 C of warming. These figures need to come down dramatically to 0.7 tons per person by 2050. And this also shows that poor people are extremely responsible. And the second speaker of our team has also mentioned that poor people are the ones who mainly uses coins and cash, and rich people are actually only using cards right now, which are like credit cards, which actually save than coins, and coins are actually produced for poor people. When you go into like convenience stores, we use it, and then there are a lot of change and like more, and then because of that also poor people, when they go to stores, they usually get like receipts which is also produced that affects the climate change, which also shows that why on our perspective, and we see that poor people are more responsible than rich people for climate change, and it is also more significant, and it has more evidence to prove this state. And this is my conclusion. Thank you.